Okay, hey everyone. I'm just here to talk to you a little bit about my experiences so far playing The Division, Tom Clancy's The Division. Now, I originally was very much on the fence considering whether or not I actually wanted to buy this game or not, because, well, I've heard about it for a couple of years. I think we all have. And there was some doubt coming into my mind, wondering if the game would truly deliver. I mean, Ubisoft itself tended to have something of a mixed record when it comes to this sort of thing, especially since a lot of us tended to be more or less kind of burnt out on the Assassin's Creed games that came out. And but Tom Clancy always tended to sort of deliver. I purchased Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six Siege, and I found that fairly interesting enough. I found myself playing that, and here we are with The Division. Of course, one of the things that drew me towards actually getting The Division was the promise of what it had. I mean, it was an interesting concept where you had a storyline about you being a super secret agent that was activated because of a pandemic or an no a pandemic, not epidemic that swept New York, and as you learn in the game, pretty much the whole world because of contaminated cash that was that had viruses placed upon it. So that changed hands, and essentially a whole plague spread out, killing millions of people and sickening many more. And you're sent in there to sort of figure out what's going on. And as it turns out, you are sent to New York City, which is, of course, the setting of the game. Now, I thought it was actually a pretty interesting concept. I mean, in terms of Tom Clancy style plots, this is actually a very scarily realistic sort of thing because well, of course, one of the classic Tom Clancy stuff usually involves like Cold War or Russians or something like that, nuclear missiles. But here it's different. This is a biological warfare style plot. And the reason why it's actually kind of scary is because it's easily possible. I mean, we ourselves have engaged in biological warfare before, and the concept that a person could actually manufacture a plague is actually very realistic. I'm pretty sure that people do it simply for research purposes. In this game, you have a person or a group of people that manufactured it specifically for the purpose of actually killing people. And to actually choose the vector for this plague to go through money is actually also scary because how often do you handle money? All the time, right? And that's the sort of thing that makes this sort of plot believable. Is that this is sort of like a semi-realistic depiction of what would happen if such a plague scenario actually went down, and this is what happened. And in that way, I kind of appreciate the game for that because it's trying to sort of keep grounded. So, the plot is good, good so far. So far, like in the game, I'm roughly about level 14 right now, so this is slightly more than where the footage is showing right now, and I find the plot itself to be fairly simplistic, but not in a bad sort of way. It's very easy to follow, and of course there's sort of plot twists that are going to come up that are hinted at right now, especially through like the in-game radio station where you have like this fringe like alternative media source who commonly commentates on what's going on in the game, and I'm pretty sure that there's going to be some sort of interesting changes and all that. So let's talk about what I like about the game so far. The sheer size of this game is fantastic. I like free roaming sandbox style games. Like I grew up with Grand Theft Auto and all that, and so I've always had sort of like a love for these sort of things, and the fact that it was actually like a real location really sort of changed things. Really sort of made it more interesting, especially since it's New York City. New York City was one of my favorite American cities, and it's one of the cities I actually need to go to at least once in my life. I mean, despite the flaws and all that, you got to see New York. I mean, millions of people passed through it to go wherever it is that they were going. So I love the size. This is truly a big city, especially since you're kind of locked to exploring it on foot. Now, a couple of times I was watching this wondering, why wouldn't you have cars and all that? And while I was walking around and seeing all the destruction and the cluttered nature of everything, it kind of made a lot of sense. Regarding it, like it's a plague scenario, people aren't able to move around. They're just abandoning their cars in the streets. Oftentimes, people were killed in their cars, especially since if you have this stuff like these cool echo sequences, which sort of reconstruct an area that shows what happened prior to you being there. Yeah, there was like a sort of a plausible explanation why everyone is on foot. And also because maybe there is no gas, which would explain it, since a lot of the gas is being taken by some of these street gang style things. So, going back to the city, there's actually a fair amount of interior structures which you can explore. And what this game does very, very well is it gets the little details. Look at this prison cell. Look at all the graffiti around there. Look at the pockmarks. And it's the details that count in games like these. It's the details that give the environment that living, breathing aspect to it that shows that, hey, this looks like a real city. I mean, you had Grand Theft Auto, of course, but after playing a little while, you figure, like, yes, there's people walking around, but it seems sort of static. Like, it doesn't seem entirely realistic in a way. But then I'm walking around New York City. I'm seeing things like these little little coffee shops around there with things with things just hanging there, like cups all over the place, like the machines that are still on. You look at these light poles where they have these little what do you call them? The little phone number sheets, like something like learn how to play guitar or speak Korean or some sort of obscure thing, and it shows that wow, people lived here. There was a life at some time. Like even something like the tire tracks in the snow. It's the little details that I appreciate, and this is something that this game gets very well. And look, this game is massive. You are only exploring a part of New York. Like, you're not even exploring stuff like the financial district or stuff where Ground Zero is. Or you're not going to be able to explore part of, like, where Central Park is. And my theory is that this area is going to be expanded as things like DLC are going to come out, which inevitably it will come out. But it will expand the area. Or you won't be able to explore Central Park because in the introduction of the game it shows that, oh, Central Park has turned into a massive burial ground. Wouldn't that be something if you could go in there and it's sort of like similar to Dark Zones. Imagine if they expanded the Dark Zones, which I'm willing to bet they're actually going to do. Like the Dark Zone, I haven't explored it yet, but given my research on the subject, it's this massive almost quasi PvP area where you will be able to see other agents and everyone is fair game. If someone wants to shoot you down, steal your loot, they can do that. So I was talking about the city before, but I was also talking about the weapon system. Now the weapon system is kind of similar to Destiny. There's quite a few of these things that are similar to Destiny, and I will explain that in a second. That the weapon selection is fairly good, if not a little limited. I mean, there are weapons that really sort of accomplish a whole lot. You have marksman rifles that also double as sniper rifles. Actually, there are essentially sniper rifles. These are all essentially marksman rifles. There's assault rifles, submachine guns, and handguns and shotguns. Although there isn't anything like rocket launchers, which you imagine that with New York City, with the bustling underworld that it has, would probably have a whole bunch of that sort of stuff. Look at this traffic garage. I mean, look at all this, like the trash bags all over the place. There are a lot of trash bags over this. It makes me wonder how much trash on average New York City generates in a day. And I thought maybe it was a little bit too much at one time, but after you think about it, there's like 8, 9, 10 million people that live on this island, maybe more, maybe less, and everyone generates some major degree of trash. And New York City's garbage industries have to work incredibly quickly to deal with all this. So if you shut down everything for a little while, at least 2 weeks given the plot of the game, everything is going to pile up fairly quickly, and the more I think about it, the more realistic this actual scenario looks. So I was talking about weapons a second ago. So you can modify your weapons. It's not, say, to the degree of Ghost Recon Future Soldier, where you can literally tear the gun apart, change the gas block system, change the pistons, change the magazines, change out essentially everything, add a bayonet, add a stock and all that, but you can do a fair amount here, which can modify your weapon somewhat. Like there's a cool, I like rolling, I'm currently rolling with a Mosin Nagant rifle, which I have set up for mid-range combat, so it's no longer a long-range sniper rifle as it was before. you can toss like a times 12 scope on it, but I have an ACOG scope on it right now and a suppressor which limits the threat of the gun, so I can still shoot at bad guys from a long distance, but I can still do a fairly decent amount of work up close. So, otherwise, though, my complaint is that there just aren't a whole lot of weapons. And you'd think in a city as big as New York, you would find a whole bunch of contraband stuff. Like, you would find a whole bunch of stuff like, actually, no, you wouldn't. Like SPAS 12 shotguns. No, that wouldn't be around because, well, they aren't really produced anymore. I don't remember if I shot that civilian or not. I like to think that I didn't. But you'd see a whole bunch of more stuff. In terms of enemies, there are a couple of major gangs. You have three major ones. The guys I'm fighting right now are known as the Cleaners, which are trying to eradicate the virus from New York City through the only means that they know how, burning everything. Actually, this is fairly straightforward logic because in plague scenarios, burning bodies is actually a fairly common way back in the Middle Ages to get rid of a disease. So, actually, when you think about it, these guys are kind of engaging in a time-honored tradition, shall we say, in how to deal with an epidemic like this. So these guys essentially like to burn things, so expect to see a lot of those things. And you've seen me shooting at the propane tanks on their backs, which you can ignite. Oh, look, this is what I was talking about. Like, you even have civilians just shouting from the windows. I scared that one. She ran back inside because if you point your gun at someone, they actually run away. Funny, right? I didn't know it worked like that. But you have civilians that are like out the window and shouting down to you, like saying, "Hey, you're doing a good job," or "Hey, you got some booze," or something like that. And it's little things that make the city come alive again. I have to keep on going back to that. I have to keep on going back to the little details that make this game worth really looking at. So, aside from the Cleaners, you have these guys called the Rikers, which are prisoners from Rikers Island, which is one of the largest prison systems in the United States with 10 to 15,000 inmates that are there. Now, it says that inmates came from Rikers Island to Manhattan. Did they all come? It kind of would explain that sort of thing. And there's another one called the MLB, I think they were called. I don't know what they stand for. But I thought it would be more interesting to have a couple of more factions, like factions controlling districts. And maybe that'll happen as we have much more space that'll eventually come. It's my guess. Oh, and someone left a little present for me. Those are around there sometimes, and you may notice that too late or not. So there may be more gangs that come up as time goes by. I would imagine maybe the Mafia survived the plague and is trying to keep their businesses running. Actually, now that I think about it, they might have evacuated with a whole lot of other people. And the other one is your generic rioters, like that don't really represent anyone. They're just dudes like these that are just scrounging around the city trying to get a whole bunch of things. Well, that's okay. They notice me, though, so I'm going to deal with them anyway. You can avoid them if you keep your distance, but otherwise there isn't a whole lot you can do. So, going back to the size of New York, I figured that I thought this was some sort of compressed space, but the more I think about it, the more I think that this is like a fairly accurate representation of how big New York City actually is. I mean, the actual compressed area aside from the playable area, I'm guessing you can actually travel from one end of the island to the other in a relatively similar time that you could do it in real life running on foot. This is really one of the more accurate representations of New York City that I've actually seen in a video game. So, I talked about the combat, I've talked about the enemies and all that. There are side missions galore in this game. I've been playing for maybe 10, 11 hours so far, and I've just been going around doing stuff. I according to the statistics, I'm roughly 40% of the way through the story itself, which means that if you were to do simply just the single-player missions, the game itself might not be as long as you think it is. But with the side missions, this will keep you going for a little while. And after a little while, you'll be establishing a base of operations, which you'll be able to upgrade, which means that you'll be going out, doing side missions, earning stuff, and earning upgrades for your base that's close to Madison Square Garden. I think you're at the New York City Central Post Office. I think that's what you are. And look at all of this. I can't stop stressing just how the little details make this city look like people lived here. And I can't stress that enough. So the missions, however massive the number might be, it really boils down to go to this point and shoot these guys. There's really very little variance in the missions themselves. Maybe only encounter maybe 3 or 4 individual types of missions with not a whole lot of difference between them. Although there are the more interesting ones are the timed missions, where you're going to a certain point and then you have to activate a certain part of city's infrastructure, like an antenna, and you'll have to go and and find the receiver of this antenna before time runs out. And this is a little interesting because it really gets you moving. It really gets you to try to find out where you need to go before time runs out, and it also leads to like a little minor bit of panic because you really need to work out how to get to your objective and through what means do you have to get to your objective. So let's talk about what I'm not particularly fond of in this game. I'm finding that I'm playing this kind of like any other cover-based shooter. I know that it really more plays like a traditional RPG in which you have to manage stuff like your defense, your health, your stamina, and your weapon capacity, which allows you to use better items depending on what sort of gear you're using. But I'm very, very much playing this almost like a Gears of War style thing where in order to have any sort of real advantage over the enemies around me, I have to duck and cover, or I have to stay plastered to one jersey barrier in order to have any sort of effect against the enemies around me. Now, this makes a fair amount of sense, though. I am a squishy human, though, and as it turns out, I'm kind of allergic to bullets. I tend to die if I ingest too many. So that kind of makes sense. Also, one of the things that sort of really break the immersion is when you're fighting some of the enemies, most commonly the rioters, they tend to repeat a whole lot of lines. Actually, everyone in this game kind of repeats a whole lot of their lines. One of the things is if you're fighting rioters and you kill them in the streets, or you kill one guy and he says, oh, they killed Alex. And the thing is, though, I figured the first time I heard that, I was like, okay, interesting. And all that. They're kind of adding a sort of personality to the rioters, in that, wow, like you're actually killing people, not faceless enemies. Like they have names, they have friends, and all that. But then I heard it a few more times, and I heard it a few more times after that. Then just thinking that, okay, is this really the problem? Did they really not have a whole lot of time in the recording booth? Did they not have time to make newer lines? Could they have a few more names thrown in? But they didn't, and that's like kind of disappointing. That for all the work that these guys put into their world, the details in the world, where it really fumbles is how the enemies sort of react. Now, for the most part, enemies tend to be kind of like bullet magnets in the sense that they kind of walk out in the open and kind of want to be shot. But this is not true for all the enemies, of course, let me just state. Now, there are rather intelligent enemies in this game, especially I find the Rikers. And I'll tell you why. When I'm fighting the rioters, they really have no combat skills whatsoever, in the sense that they will just run out in the open, sometimes firing their guns sideways like gangsters, in the hopes that they look cool whilst I'm gunning them down. And if they're in cover, usually they will not move around. What I've been finding with the other enemies, though, is that they will flank you. And I find this most common with the Rikers, where they will actually try to run around your position and try to surprise you. This has actually happened quite a few times to great effect and to somewhat a surprise. And that's cool right there, is that you can, of course, light the one of the cleaners' propane tanks on fire. I mentioned that before, but if you really use it tactically, you can actually damage the enemies around you as well. So the AI is hit and miss depending on where you're firing. See, that's a good little skill to have, though, is that these enemies, of course, you fight stronger enemies that are differentiated with, like, I guess, like armor or something. That's what it's intended to be, and where you can wear them down. But otherwise, they're just stronger versions of other enemies. Like, they really don't look a whole lot different. And I think I've only had one real female enemy, like that was the leader of a gang, so they're mostly like 99% male. Not that that's a problem or anything like that, but it's just a lack of variety in the way that some of these guys look. What I'm also also think that it would be interesting is that it would have been better, I think, if you had. Well, I mean, you can sort of tell who you're shooting at, but if you show the title of the enemy, I know like there's games that show like a full readout of the enemy that shows what they are, what faction they're aligned to. Now, from a distance, I can't really tell all that much. And you figured if you're doing like a ping or a scanning, which is one of the skills that I have equipped right now, is that you can tell what the enemy is before they get there. That way you're better prepared for how to fight them. But once they get up close, you can typically sort of tell if they're actually... sometimes I'm not even very sure if they're even Rikers or any other gang member. Like, the Rikers are really the only one that I have trouble differentiating, even up close and far away, because there's really very little differentiation on how these units look compared to one another. As I stated before, I wish there were more weapon types in this game. New York's a big city. There's bound to be a whole lot of guns in this place, and I'm expecting to have sort of different guns like over and under shotguns, semi-automatic rifles, more shotguns, maybe revolvers. These things are present, but in numbers that are fairly disappointing given how many weapon types there are in other Tom Clancy games. I mean, especially compared to say Rainbow Six Siege. How many types of weapons there were in those games as well, and whether or not you were able to put different sights on there. In terms of controls, everything is fairly good, and I don't have a whole lot of problem with that. The only problem I really do have is really just having to zoom in additionally to shoot at an enemy. Yes, if you pull up the... I'm playing on a computer, so if you use the right mouse button, you can bring up the aiming sights. Pretty straightforward, pretty standard fare right there. But you also have to click an additional button in order to actually bring up the scope, and this doesn't work with all guns. Yes, you can zoom in more or less with everything, but it's really only apparent with the scoped weapons. If you're using a red dot sight, you actually don't bring that up, and I thought that's a little disappointing, because I thought that it would be something similar to like how in Ghost Recon, where the character does fire in a third-person perspective, yes, but when you bring up a scope, you'll actually bring up the actual red dot sight so you can look through it and place your shots. And that's a little disappointing because virtually every single game I played with a Tom Clancy logo on it, like Splinter Cell or Ghost Recon, has had functionality like that, and I did not see that. I think it actually would be interesting, you know, if this is actually taking place in the Tom Clancy universe, if there would actually be like a cameo from something like Third or Fourth Echelon, or having ghosts come in to help clean things up. Because I know that Tom Clancy games like to interact with one another, they like to take place in the same universe. So that's somewhat disappointing. If that does exist, I haven't seen it yet, which it very likely could potentially have. I mean, considering that the Division agents have something similar to something like Sam Fisher's sonar goggles, where he's able to ping enemies. It's just like a little personal thing I think I would have liked to see that sort of tied into the whole universe that they have going on there. Would have been cool. Not necessarily necessary, but would have actually been pretty cool to have like a couple of name drops to stuff like Third Echelon and whatnot. Okay, so what else can I talk about here? I think the only other issue I can think of is that the game itself only takes place during the winter. Now, I understand that this is really only like a very, very little, like almost like a pet peeve sort of level of things. But when you think about it, it kind of makes sense, and I kind of wish that they tackled this a little bit differently. The plot of the game says that this sort of thing happened on Black Friday, which, again, makes perfect sense in the context of the game because it's one of the busiest shopping days in the United States. And it makes perfect sense that this is where the authors of this virus would choose to use it as the primary vector. But some time has actually passed since then. The city itself doesn't look very different compared to everything else around it. Like, like the snow doesn't melt and all that. It would have been interesting if it did, like if the snow gathered or if there was more snow that fell or something like that. That would have made the game a bit more interesting. The weather effects in the game are actually very cool. Of course, that allow you to do that sort of thing. That allow you to play in blinding fog, snow, or something like that. So that's good. Okay, so that's my quick take on how I'm liking things so far in the Division. To wrap it all up, I think it's interesting. I like it, and I wish there were a couple of things that are different that maybe Ubisoft is going to change in the future. Otherwise, it's a very, very enjoyable game so far, and I look forward to playing it a little bit more, going out and collecting the absolute smorgasbord of things that are out there waiting. I can't wait to explore New York a little bit more, and maybe I'll be brave enough to go into the dark zones. Next time, when I actually have a bit more of an informed opinion about it, I'm going to be making some comparisons to Destiny and how the games are kind of similar to one another. But until then, I'm going to go about enjoying the Division. If you're sitting through this, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Take it easy, and have a good day.